Sarah Ferguson has finally reached a point in her life where she is ready to reveal the truth, every part of it, without hesitation, without filters, and without the careful polishing that usually accompanies anything connected to the royal world. This truth is not limited to how she actually met Meghan. It stretches far deeper into the private spaces the public never saw, the quiet encounters that shaped early impressions, and the social circles that surrounded both women long before Meghan ever married Prince Harry. More importantly, Sarah is prepared to explain exactly what pulled their relationship apart, thread by thread, until the bond that once seemed warm and welcoming dissolved into silence and tension. What she is preparing to reveal is not a whisper passed behind gloved hands, not a rumor repeated in tabloids, and not speculation created by outsiders seeking drama. This is Fergie herself, a woman who has survived more scandals than most people could imagine, stepping forward with a level of honesty strong enough to shake the foundations of the carefully managed royal narrative. Because while Meghan reshaped her public image, reinvented her life, and crafted a story about entering the royal world as an outsider swept into a fairy tale, Sarah Ferguson was standing close enough to watch the real beginning. She saw the early movements, the calculated introductions, the rise through high-value social circles, and the subtle cracks forming long before the public had even an idea that something was off. And now, with very little left to lose, Fergie is ready to speak. Her story does not begin with a royal wedding, smiling photographs, or the global attention that surrounded Meghan and Harry. It begins years earlier, in places Meghan likely assumed no one would ever dare to talk about, and in moments she never expected someone like Fergie to bring into the light. Once Sarah begins sharing her version of events, it becomes clear why her voice, above all others, may be the most dangerous voice Meghan Markle could face. Sarah Ferguson has always lived on the edges of the royal world, close enough to witness its secrets but distant enough to feel every harsh punishment when the tide turned against her. Over the decades, she has survived scandals, financial ruin, betrayal, and national humiliation, situations that would have crushed almost anyone else. She rebuilt herself again and again, often with nothing more than determination and a stubborn refusal to disappear. Yet sources close to her say that something inside her has shifted. For the first time in her life, Sarah is standing on a cliff with no security behind her and no safety ahead. Her Duchess title no longer holds power. Her former husband, Prince Andrew, brings far more scrutiny than protection. The royal family is placing more and more distance between themselves and her, and the privileged world she once moved through with confidence has narrowed into something colder, smaller, and more isolating. And when someone reaches that point, when their reputation, status, and connections no longer shield them, they become dangerous because they have nothing left to lose by telling the truth. That is why insiders believe Sarah's rumored tell-all book is not merely gossip or wishful speculation. It is a warning shot, a message aimed at the palace, at the media, and most importantly, at Meghan Markle, because Sarah has not forgotten how she was treated. She has not forgotten the moments of disrespect, the sudden coldness, and the secrets Meghan hoped would remain buried forever. A woman with nothing to lose becomes a woman capable of saying everything, and everything, for Meghan, could be far more than she is prepared to face. Before Meghan ever stepped into Kensington Palace as Harry's partner, she was already circulating within some of the most exclusive social spaces in the world, rooms filled with billionaires, politicians, celebrities, and high-ranking royals. These connections were not accidental. They were carefully curated, and at the center of those circles stood Marcus Anderson, a senior figure within Soho House, often described as a gatekeeper to the elite. Anderson reportedly introduced Meghan to private dinners, luxurious parties, and global networks of influence. Then there was Ron Burkle, a billionaire with political ties, royal connections, and a private jet that flew Meghan to a Caribbean wedding long before she was part of the royal family. Details like that may seem small to outsiders, but in royal social circles, such details shout loudly. Harry flew economy plus, while Meghan arrived by private jet, an imbalance that did not go unnoticed. Fergie pays attention to such things. That world pays attention to such things. They notice who arrives with access, who comes with privilege, and who is quietly climbing long before they have an official title. And Sarah Ferguson, who has lived inside and outside the monarchy for decades, recognized those signs immediately. So when people say Fergie knows Meghan's world, it is not an exaggeration. She knows the people who invited her into those circles. She knows the introductions that shaped her early image. She knows who opened doors for her long before Prince Harry did. And even more importantly, she knows the version of Meghan that existed before the cameras turned her into a global figure. That is the version she can describe. That is the version no one else has dared to reveal. And that is the version Meghan would prefer the world never revisits. Long before the public sensed even a hint of tension within the royal family, the earliest cracks began forming quietly between Meghan and the York women, cracks that only those within the inner circle noticed. To understand why this rift mattered so deeply, and why Sarah Ferguson has held onto it for so long, you must first understand the unique position Beatrice and Eugenie occupied within the monarchy. They were born into royalty, but raised in a shadowed corner of it, close enough to know every rule yet distant enough to observe how selectively those rules were applied. They grew up watching their mother endure decades of mockery, judgment, and scandal, a constant reminder that the monarchy could embrace you in one moment and turn its back on you in the next. Despite all this, the sisters retained a kindness and warmth often missing from royal protocol. They knew how to welcome outsiders, how to support newcomers, and how to soften the sharp edges of royal life. So when Meghan arrived, excited, glamorous, and bursting into the public eye, they greeted her with polite openness. They understood the novelty of entering a world governed by unwritten expectations. They understood the confusion, the pressure, the sudden scrutiny. And initially, things were smooth. Social interactions felt natural, conversations felt warm, and there was a sense that Meghan, like many before her, would become part of their extended circle. But slowly, then very suddenly, things changed. According to those close to the situation, Meghan began distancing herself from the York sisters, not gradually, but sharply and intentionally. After securing her position beside Harry, she allegedly shifted from warmth to detachment, creating a quiet hierarchy in which she sat above them. Invitations that once would have been accepted went unanswered, messages became shorter, interactions that used to feel friendly became clipped, transactional, and cool. What had begun as an easy social connection was now replaced by an unspoken divide. As Meghan and Harry settled deeper into their new roles within the monarchy, this shift became impossible for the York sisters and their mother to ignore. Meghan allegedly treated Beatrice and Eugenie as if they were beneath her, burdened by their family scandals, overshadowed by their father's controversies, and irrelevant to the polished image she was beginning to curate for herself. Meghan had entered the palace with the advantage of novelty. She was new, modern, glamorous, and widely praised. In contrast, the York sisters had spent years dealing with headlines that mocked their fashion, their personalities, and even their presence within the royal family. But what Meghan misunderstood was that despite the public jokes and criticism within the family, Beatrice and Eugenie had a quiet, steady significance. They were well liked, they were loyal, they were known for their kindness, not their drama. So when Meghan dismissed them, socially and emotionally, it did not go unnoticed, not by them, not by their social circle, and certainly not by Sarah Ferguson. Yet despite this growing tension, everything could still have calmed down. The rift could have faded into the background, absorbed by time and distance, if not for one moment, one silent, decisive moment, that transformed everything. According to those familiar with the event, Sarah Ferguson reached out to Meghan one last time. Whether she wanted support, guidance, reassurance, or simply a friendly voice remains unclear. But what is clear is that Meghan did not respond. She did not return the call. She did not send a message. She did not offer even a polite acknowledgement. It was not an accidental oversight. It was a deliberate silence, a complete withdrawal, the kind of ghosting that sends a message louder than any spoken words. Meghan, sources believe, wanted distance from the York family, distance from Prince Andrew, distance from anyone connected to old scandals or complicated reputations. In her new worldview, Sarah Ferguson was unnecessary, unpolished, and too closely tied to issues Meghan wanted nothing to do with. But in cutting Fergie off, Meghan made a mistake she did not fully understand. Sarah Ferguson is not the kind of person one dismisses lightly. She is a woman who remembers, a woman who survives, a woman who has seen the royal world from angles Meghan has never touched. And more importantly, she is a woman who knows what was said, who opened which doors, and what kind of behavior took place long before Meghan became a duchess. Ghosting someone with that level of insight is not just rude, it is dangerous. According to insiders, that single moment was the spark that ignited everything that followed. The spark that transformed Sarah from a former ally into a woman willing to speak openly. The spark that turned quiet resentment into motivation. The spark that laid the foundation for a tell-all capable of reshaping Meghan's public image. When people hear the phrase tell-all, they often imagine minor gossip, awkward stories, or trivial behind-the-scenes moments. But what insiders believe Sarah could reveal goes far beyond that. Her version would be deeper, sharper, and more precise, woven with the kind of details only someone who lived behind the curtain could understand. Among the potential revelations, insiders point to 5 particularly explosive areas. First, Meghan's early lifestyle within elite social circles. Behavior that was not criminal or scandalous, but certainly not consistent with the fairy tale narrative the palace tried to craft. Second, Meghan's alleged early interest in Prince Andrew before she ever redirected her attention toward Harry, a detail that supposedly shocked Fergie, who shut it down immediately. Third, the lasting tension created by that encounter, a tension that silently shaped interactions for years. Fourth, the private jet trips and exclusive introductions facilitated by Marcus Anderson and Ron Burkle, which painted a very different picture of Meghan's early rise. And fifth, the story behind Harry's friend Tom and Skip and the reason Meghan reportedly did not want him at the wedding, something Fergie supposedly knows in full. When all of these pieces are combined, Sarah's potential book becomes far more than a memoir. It becomes a weapon capable of reshaping narratives, challenging reputations, and revealing truths Meghan would rather remain hidden, and Sarah Ferguson, pushed aside and ignored, may now be willing to wield it. While all of this tension swirled beneath the surface, something far more intriguing began unfolding inside Buckingham Palace, a silence so controlled, so deliberate, that insiders immediately recognized it as strategy rather than neutrality. There was no public denial of Sarah Ferguson's rumored intentions, no statements defending Meghan, and no attempts to reassure the world that everything within the royal family remained stable. Instead, there was only a cold and calculated quiet, a quiet that revealed more than any comment could have. According to those closest to palace dynamics, King Charles is not naive about the potential damage a full, unfiltered tell-all from Fergie could cause. His own history is long, messy, and filled with chapters he would prefer remain untouched. He knows that Sarah Ferguson, after decades within the royal sphere, possesses memories that could poke holes in narratives the Crown has spent years repairing. For that reason, insiders believe Charles is willing to negotiate with her quietly, offering small gestures, subtle support, or even strategic kindness to keep her from turning her pen against the institution. Prince William, however, operates differently. He does not bend, he does not panic, and he does not attempt to soothe potential threats with diplomacy. Unlike others, William has little to fear from Fergie's memories. His record, especially during the years Sarah is prepared to discuss, remains clean and untangled. But this difference in approach, Charles playing appeasement, William standing firm, creates an internal tension that will never make its way into headlines, but nonetheless shapes the palace's response. Meghan likely never expected that her position within the royal story could one day become part of this quiet power struggle, yet that is exactly what has begun to unfold, because if the palace reaches a point where a tell, all cannot be prevented. If someone must become the sacrificial figure, the one whose reputation absorbs the blow so the institution can stay intact, then it will not be Charles, it will not be William, and it certainly will not be Queen Camilla. The monarchy protects its core, it protects its future, and Meghan, who stepped away from the institution, who challenged it publicly, and who refused to follow its unspoken rules, has become the ideal shield. In other words, if Sarah Ferguson decides to speak with full honesty, Meghan may be the one the palace silently allows to take the hit so larger, older, and more dangerous secrets remain protected. This is why the silence is not comfort, it is preparation. It is the stillness before a storm, the kind that suggests the royal machine has already calculated the outcome and is waiting for the first strike. Now imagine a quiet morning in Montecito, the sun rising gently, birds scattering across the clear California sky. Meghan beginning her day believing, perhaps hoping, that the noise surrounding the royal family has finally begun to fade. She might believe she has successfully stepped into a new chapter, one in which the world's attention no longer weighs so heavily on her shoulders. She might believe the past is behind her. But thousands of miles away, inside an old English house filled with decades of memories both painful and powerful, Sarah Ferguson sits down to write, and she does not write out of anger alone. She does not write solely for profit. She writes because, for the first time in decades, she feels free enough to do so. She writes because her position within the monarchy no longer traps her. She writes because she has survived enough storms to know that fear loses its power once you have nothing left to lose. She writes because she has watched Meghan rise through elite rooms she herself once dominated. She writes because she remembers the warmth she once offered and the silence she received in return. She writes because she wants the world to see the truth, not the glossy, curated truth, but the real truth, the truth that existed behind closed doors, whispered in private moments, and hidden behind palace walls for too long. This is the storm building quietly on the horizon. It is not loud yet, but its presence is unmistakable. It is the weight in the air before lightning strikes, the slow gathering of clouds that cannot be stopped once the wind shifts. And Meghan, who built a public identity on reinvention, on controlling the narrative, on transforming her past into a polished story, now faces something she cannot outrun, rebrand, charm, or silence. A woman who has lived through every kind of scandal and survived. A woman who understands both the old royal world and the new celebrity world. A woman who has been humiliated, redeemed, discarded, and resurrected. A woman who knows more than she ever said, and now may finally be ready to say it. That is what makes Sarah Ferguson dangerous. She does not need power. She does not need status. She does not need approval. She only needs her voice, and that alone is enough to reshape narratives. If Fergie speaks openly, Her revelations would not simply expose chapters of Meghan's past that she hoped would stay hidden. They would challenge the image Meghan carefully built. They would challenge the strength of her marriage by dragging old truths into the light. They would challenge the royal narrative Meghan claimed to have lived through. They would challenge the version of herself she presented to millions around the world. And the most chilling element of all is this: Sarah Ferguson has nothing to lose. But Meghan has everything. Her reputation, her brand, her influence, her projects, her public sympathy. All of it stands vulnerable if someone like Fergie decides the world deserves to hear what she remembers. So, as the storm rolls closer, one question hovers in the air, heavy like thunder waiting to break open the sky. What happens when the woman Meghan underestimated the most becomes the woman who can rewrite her entire legacy? Only time will answer that question, but one thing is certain: if Sarah Ferguson speaks, the world will not just hear a story, it will hear the truth Meghan never wanted told.